My presentation today is titled Bridging the Gaps. As Neha ma'am mentioned, my name is Akshat Kapur. I'm an M.Phil research scholar from Punjab University. These are my contact details in case you need to ask me any questions after the sessions. And this presentation is based on the paper titled Exploring Philosophical Counseling as Means to Bridge Western Psychology with the Indian Tradition. Indian tradition. By that, I mean the Indian philosophical tradition as a whole. So, uh, yeah, my presentation is based on two parts, basically. The first part, I talk about the identity and nature of philosophical counseling or philosophical practice. And then I shall move on to how Indian philosophical traditions play a role in that. So I would like to proceed first with this quote by Leonardo da Vinci. I feel that a philosophical practitioner should always see things in a more interdisciplinary way. And that might not be true for an academic a philosopher, but it's very important for a philosophical practitioner to see things that way in a polymathic sense of the word. So, with regards to this quote by Leonardo da Vinci, who was himself a very uh, he was a polymath. He delved into a lot of areas, just like Aristotle was, and I think that is very central to philosophical practitioners. And keeping this in mind, I want to first elaborate on the differences between philosophy and psychology. This is based upon the book by A.C. Ewing called The Fundamentals of Philosophy, The Fundamental Questions of Philosophy. And he makes a very important point, and this is what I'll come to now, that we all know that philosophy gave rise to psychology initially, but psychology has like directed human actions after that on a global scale. It has affected us immensely, and these actions in turn have helped philosophy as a subject and to develop a better understanding of philosophical concepts and present them in a better fashion. And so I see psychology not only as a derivative of philosophy. I see the whole process as in a dialectical sense, in a Hegelian sense. If you want to see it that way, it's a very dialectical approach which I'm going to take here, and that's how I'm going to proceed with my argument. So, philosophical counseling, is there an ongoing identity crisis? So, the counseling movement, for those who don't know, it officially began in 1980, and since then there has been a lot of talk about how it is going to play out, what is the nature of the whole philosophical counseling movement, and what is the methodology we should settle upon. But it's a problem maybe that we cannot solve because of the nature of philosophy as an academic discipline. And as practitioners, we have to be mindful of that. But because we are practitioners, there is a need to draw a line somewhere in terms of practice. We cannot not have a consensus in terms of practice, in terms of practicing movement, or in terms of counseling. So this might not actually be counterintuitive to us, as some might think. However, this question is something I want to tackle because it's very important for the new students who are coming into this field. When I entered the field of philosophical counseling, it was a very I was in huge confusion because of the lack of standardization, of the lack of consensus. But then I realized that might not be a problem if we see things in a different way. However, as I said, when we practice, when you counsel, there has to be demarcation as to who you can counsel, what is your code of ethics. There needs to be a very definite, sense. There needs to be a definite code of ethics that you need to follow. So I'll just move on to this chart here. So here we can see like this red color that I mentioned here, it deals with the clinical population. Now, the clinical population is uh, basically the one that the psychologist or psychiatrist should be dealing with. This has a blurry line. The boundaries to this are very blurry, and the maroon part, which I marked deliberately in the circle, it means that there is scope for philosophical counselors or consultants or practitioners to enter this field, but not currently as I see it. We have to be humble in terms of the reality that we face. And uh, because we are not standardized, because there is not a code of ethics, we need to be very cautious moving into this circle. And so I believe like everything, every color here on this chart, white, blue, green, purple, except for the red part, is where the domain of philosophical practitioners currently lies. And this might help, you know, forming a certain perspective about the whole thing. I would think that I would like to think that philosophical practice involves every color. But for now, I I would like I am faced with the reality of the situation. We are all faced with the reality of the situation, and which is why I feel we should not be dealing with the clinical population at all. There is a lot of scope here. Like we can be coaches, consultants, and counselors, and a lot of practitioners do employ philosophical combination of philosophical, psychological, religious, spiritual techniques here in this field. And we of course have the white space which we can explore. But again, uh, we need to proceed cautiously here, dealing with this maroon area. This is only in terms of practice. Uh, this brings me to one of the speakers and professors called Dr. Rabe. He said that we should be everywhere according to his approach. I feel in theory we can delve into this side, we can delve into the red color, but eventually, when we practice right now, we should stay away from the red. Next part is the differences between philosophical counseling or practice and psychotherapy. For me, there are three basic tenets. You can like call them two, which separate philosophical practice from psychotherapy, and they are that philosophical counseling is not prescriptive. We do not tell a client what to do or how he should behave or whether he should behave like this to attain certain things. I do not think that should be the goal. And at the same time, we need and with this, we need to protect and promote the autonomy of the client. This is very central to the philosophical counseling process. And I know this is not set in stone. This is not a black and white thing. You cannot say this and like have this in practice. It needs to be this is where the skill of the counselor and the skill of the communication skills or the counseling skills and the training which someone undergoes, that comes into play. And I also feel that they can be advice, but they should not be any unsolicited advice. They should, yeah, no unsolicited advice, as in if the person asks the philosophical counselor or consultant for an advice, maybe he can refer to him. Maybe he can give it to him. And that is where the subjective experience of the counselor comes into play as well. That is where we will be set apart in our approach. And that is a good thing because we do not want to be competing against each other in any way. We need to be coherent and have a consensus in the way we see things. So the subjective experience of the counselor is also very, very central to the process. Now, that takes me to the next part now, where I will also deal with the Indian philosophical tradition in terms with all the topics that we have covered. Now, psychology and the Indian philosophical tradition. The Indian systems of philosophical thought, they would never be like only philosophical or only books. They will always be poetic. There are hymns, mantras, religious symbolism, ritualistic practices. There's art, and that constitutes the whole system of thought. and it was never meant to be therapeutic. It was never meant to treat someone in some way. One important part, and this differentiates us from the existentialist approach, is that we do acknowledge suffering, but that is not where we proceed from, or from the external factors, as it might be the case in terms of psychotherapy. We are not like disregarding suffering at all, the Indian system of thought, but we want to proceed from the inner sense, from self knowledge, so to say. And this, because of this, the Western academic psychological paradigm cannot fit in the Indian systems of thought completely. They can incorporate them in like ways like transcendental meditative practices or yogic practices, which again are advertised as therapeutic techniques. So they again become prescriptive and advisory in their nature, and that in turns does not, that in turn can, so philosophy can help psychology in that sense, or philosophical practitioners can help psychologists develop better therapeutic practices or better therapeutic techniques. This, however, this disadvantage for psychology, our advantage is an advantage for philosophical practitioners. When you look at the Indian philosophical tradition, and in a very Indian sense as well. And philosophical counselors or practitioners can leverage this very well, especially in the Indian context. The Indian context, general people, general population, they do not know who Freud is. They do not resonate with Heidegger. They will not get what Dasein is, but they will, they will have heard, they will have come across Vedanta, for example. They will look into it, and you have to, you cannot disregard that. You cannot have a universal approach if you're based in India, or you have to incorporate the cultural context, and this is where Indian philosophical tradition can help philosophical counseling in a way. But we need to have a modern conceptualization of moksha and nirvana or enlightenment or liberation or whatever, and that needs to be presented to the general public in very simple terms, in my sense. We are seen as holders of certain vocabulary, and we are sitting alone in our ivory towers, the academic philosophers, and that general perception is out there. When I talk to people out there, when I meet other people from other fields, engineers, doctors, that is the general perception of academic philosophers. And mostly it is because they tell me that they've read texts and they've come across terms like solipsism or whatever that is, Heidegger's terms like Dasein, and they do not resonate with them. So we need to simplify these conceptualization of moksha, nirvana, maybe in a subjective sense as well, and for the general public sphere in a very simplified manner, which is a task which will take skill and effort. But it is something that the philosophical practitioners can do very well, because they're not, I think, in my opinion, they should not be limited to their books. They're very much out there, they're very much traveling. And as I said initially, they need to be very much as like polymathic personalities and interdisciplinary approach to life and stuff. Also, this could also guide their own philosophical counseling practices. So, going on to the next. Yeah, so I will conclude with these remarks. In terms of professionalization, when I see the whole professional sphere, there are different accreditation authorities like APPA, NPC, and they've been developing themselves. But again, there needs to be a code of ethics which governs all these, so that when we're out in the general public sphere, we're presenting ourselves as a consensus. There's a consensus. We are coherent. So I think that is very much the need of the hour in terms of professionalization of the field. And of course, philosophical practitioners need to learn from other disciplines and not just divorce themselves from them. Uh, there are numerous examples of entrepreneurs and engineers, and there was a video of Sadhguru meeting someone in the streets of Delhi, who he said to be enlightened and stuff. So there are people out there who we can learn from, who we can develop our practices from, and the whole idea that we need to limit ourselves to philosophy or philosophical books and academic philosophy or journals, that might not be applicable to philosophical practitioners, and that presents a challenge for practitioners as well, because for especially for young students, we have to not only make sure that we carry out our academic duties, but we are also practicing out there, and we're learning from our practices and putting that into the philosophy. If we resort to confining ourselves to books, I do not think that the process works for philosophical practitioners. This might work for academic philosophy, but not for philosophical practitioners. And here we need to take a cue from the Indian philosophical tradition, which sees things in a holistic way. And when I talk about Indian philosophical tradition, it does include Charvak. It does not mean that I'm disregarding anyone. I mean, Charvak can also be taken as an inspiration in some sense, and there needs to be more research and, of course, more writings in that regard. And this is what philosophical practitioners can really tap into. And to conclude, I think there are no limits to what philosophical practitioners might be able to do in the future. In theory, I do not think we should limit ourselves to even mental health issues. So we can maybe look at different disorders from a philosophical perspective, from a philosophical lens. And but we need to be very careful that while we're doing that, we should not be in an advisory role or like deal with that clinical population currently, because we are not trained. There are drugs out there, maybe they work well, maybe chemistry needs help of Indian philosophy or Indian philosophical practitioners, and that is a very personal opinion again, and that interdisciplinary approach thing is a way to look at things. I do feel in the end that, as I said, there is no limit to what we can do in the future. But again, that is very much dependent upon the code of ethics that we follow, and that needs to be there first. So if I Google philosophical counseling, I think that is the first page that should come up. I am like, when I Google philosophical counseling, I am thrown into this world of so much confusion when I initially entered it, and I think that's somewhere at in the eyes of the general public, it gives us a bad reputation in some sense, and that does not need to be there, because we will be dealing with the general public. By general public, I mean those who are not studying academic philosophy or philosophy in general or philosophical texts in general. And if we are not out there, then I don't think why are we even discussing this field? Why are we even having that confidence? So this is a very important point that we need to consider. Overall, I do think that we are sitting on a proverbial gold mine, but yeah, we need to be very cautious, and there needs to be training and seeing the world for what it is now, and approaching things cautiously. Yeah. So these are my contact details. You can even message me after the session if you feel the need to ask a question. And I would like to thank all the educators, the presenters, the visitors, the attendees, and especially the conference organizers for organizing such a beautiful conference. And in a way, this just reinforces the fact, reinforces what I'm referring to here. There are like clinical psychologists attending this conference. There are philosophers, counselors. I think that is the need of the hour, and we should come together as a species to look into this thing. Thank you so much.